That's a good use of musical instruments. And let's see, as is typical, every time I get up here, I see faces that are very long. Is there anybody that can risk having a long face when I'm looking at you and hoping for it? Oh, there's a couple. No, they're beginning to smile. There they go. There's one. There's a couple. So much better. At least for me it is. Welcome, Sophia and Christopher, political science students. I didn't get where you go to school, but I hope all goes well for you. And Mac. Hi, Mac. Nice to meet you. Pardon me, I can hardly, rebut. We welcome all of you, including those that are here regularly. Today is an important day of remembrance. Maybe not for everybody, but certainly for some bodies. Lyndon Baines Johnson died today, 50 years ago. It wasn't just that. The Supreme Court of the United States signed into law Roe v. Wade, enabling all people to have competent, available medical care if they are so desiring and making the decision to have an abortion. The reason I celebrate it is because I don't agree with the Supreme Court decision that rescinded, repealed, took away that ruling just recently. We used to have something called the Clergy Consultant Service, and it was like an underground network of Christians and Jewish leaders who assisted women in need of abortion and other reproductive health services in the days way before Roe v. Wade. And I came on board way after Roe v. Wade was enacted. One thing that's very critical, in the nation, 71% of the American public say that abortion should be legal, or in most instances, as do many white Protestant mainline communities, 67% believe that pro-choice is necessary and important. They're supportive of it. That support for reproductive health and rights is neither knee-jerk nor shallow, coming from the wrestling with texts or traditions, social and medical science, and the complexity inherent in human life. It's strengthened by being trusted and graced with the stories of the people for whom we reach out and care. Those of sexual violence and contraceptive failure, of devastating diagnoses for wanted children and health complications for mothers, of trauma, of poverty. Yet, despite the widespread support for safe and legal abortion, very few congregations or members of the clergy are likely to speak out for reproductive justice. 80% of mainline clergy, it is said, have no problem talking about, hunger, poverty, issues of social justice, and a lot of them talk about marriage and family quite often, but a mere 26% from the pulpits report addressing about abortion or capital punishment. Yes, conservatives have undone Roe v. Wade. And the only question is not between the haves and the have-nots. It's between the haves and the bin-hads. A complicated history suggests the reason for this widespread support for abortion rights and the ongoing reticence to speak regularly and publicly about such issues. But that reticence has allowed national conversation about abortion to be taken over by an overly simplified narrative forwarded by different kinds of religious groups. I'm thinking now of the white evangelical churches, Christians. Instead of a complicated pastoral issue requiring nuance and empathy, and above all, trusting women to make their own choices for their own bodies, abortion, even from the moment of conception, is falsely equated with infanticide. Legislation in states across the nation has become increasingly punitive for doctors and for women who are being cared for. A new direction in the anti-abortion movement for years has focused simply on making abortion nearly impossible to get. Well, long time ago, clergy had provided comfort and moral authority in the course of their pastoral ministry for generations. And that meant that they've often been approached by women and families in the midst of reproductive crises. And though abortion has been criminalized for more than half of our country's history until the 1950s, the procedure was not difficult to get, or was it unduly dangerous? More restrictive laws came in, rendering abortions more dangerous. They said it was. And in the late 60s and 70s, I saw firsthand the effect of those legislative shifts and were part of the brief moment of broad consensus that anti-abortion laws were leading to a public health crisis. They're shutting them down, the clinics. And so people who do not have means, people who may be marginalized and of very, very poor circumstance, they desperately need. Consensus was broad, included liberal Jews and Unitarians and Christians. The consistent and vocal position of conservatives were the outlier rather than the rule. And I don't mind telling you, this is really dear to my heart because, a couple of days before my mother passed away, I was 20. She was 42. And she told me something incredible that I realized why she had the difficulties she's had in her life. She said, I gave up 3 children after you. Gave up? Yeah, I had to give them up for adoption because there was no abortion procedure. Really? Well, I thought maybe she's under too much medication. I don't know, maybe. I don't know how you can exaggerate such a thing. And so I just let it go. Then she passed away. And then we lived, my sister and I, we lived on. And when I was 45 years old, a good 25 years later, one of them called me. My name is whatever, and I think I'm your brother. Are you sitting down? Yeah, I'm sitting down. So I had to go through the whole process of, I owed it to him. I didn't want to go through it, but open all the old photo albums and talk and talk and talk. I wondered, how in the world did my mother get through all that? Oh, it was horrible. Well, in the time period, there was clergy and laity alike formed a network that stretched across the whole country, providing information and support, funding for women to procure an estimated 250,000 to 500,000 abortions. And growing out of their pastoral practice, the work of caring people manifested a passion for personal autonomy, privacy, human dignity. Like Gloria Steinem said to these white men making the laws, your laws end where my skin begins. She said that. And growing out of these decisions, everyone understood the intense personal dynamic best left to a woman, whatever option she chooses, and whatever final authority there would be, it's her choice, and nobody has a right to intrude upon that. White men decided the moral legislation of what black women, by and large, must do with their bodies. And that's a moral disgrace, in my opinion. In the years after, in New York, they legalized abortion in 1970. And some for-profit abortion providers shifted the conversation from public health crisis to a crass and commercial endeavor with practically pornographic billboards that made even those staunchly in favor of protecting reproductive rights very uncomfortable, made me uncomfortable. And today that image of abortion procedures are available, cheap and on demand. It persists, though it's extremely difficult, if not practically impossible, to access an abortion or a host of other reproductive health care services. Even ligation, IUDs in many states. There's a source among us that has pushed another false narrative about abortion to rile up voters. Well, with the dramatic rise of conservatism in the 70s, and the 80s, and the 90s, the takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention, Jerry Falwell's moral majority. And I thought, there's a play on words because it's neither moral or it's nor the majority. The election of Ronald Reagan, Christian, came to be equated with the composition, we must be opposed to abortion, to homosexuality, to premarital sex, and government protection of women's rights or support of those living in poverty. We maintain public support, says the coalition, but we lost the narrative. Well, that loss is twofold. First, ever since Roe, other groups have been working tirelessly to get it overturned. And every election is about the seats in legislators limiting the access at the state level, and a race, and I mean a race, to the Supreme Court. And so those of caring nature, along with other independent clinics and organizations, they continued in the parent shadow network, advocating, protesting, engaging in the legislative process, publishing op-eds, training clergy, and other leaders to provide information and resources and compassionate care to those who needed this reproductive health care and justice. Well, let me tell you, this is nothing other than, more than, the Dred Scott case. Maybe you know of it in history. Dred Scott made his way with his wife to freedom. And in 1857, he sued the government so that he could become a free person, eligible for citizenship, etc. Well, he walked in to the Supreme Court to hear his case. And he walked in as a free man. He escaped. And he walked out as a slave. They ruled against him. They said he was property. And they ruled with the white landowners, and they had a right to retrieve their property that had escaped. Go and get them. That was it. Now, I know that pro-choice clergy struggle to find the proper context to have conversations about abortion outside of the closed doors of pastoral visits. Sermons don't always provide the space for the kind of conversation that's personal, that I've been involved in. And small group discussions by nature reach only a percentage of congregations. I know that's strange, though, that in my experience, maybe yours too, youth groups talk about abortion. Adults, not so many. Not so many. It's very interesting why. I made a reference to a woman's choice in a sermon once. Said this dear woman, she's a clergyman. I think she's a Lutheran out there in Wisconsin. And she told me, I got more criticism than in any other situation. And they went around blessing abortion clinics because they were serving people. And don't you know, right after that, protesters stormed the church, disrupted the Sunday school, and intimidated children and other worshipers. And you know what I'm talking about when somebody decides they're going to the clinic after much thought and contemplation and consulting with maybe their close people, their minister, advisors, whatever the reasons. These insidious people do their work. They latch on to you. They tell you you ought to feel guilty about even being here. And if you don't get this abortion, we'll reward you. They don't reward you, but they say it. Now, those who've been around a while, you remember Dr. George Tiller, a faithful provider of late-term abortions, murdered while he was an usher in a Sunday morning service in his Wichita Congregation Redeemer Lutheran Church at point-blank range. He was killed. And that's not the only one. On television, do I need to tell you the station? You know it already. You know it already. Hey, my son works for them. It's true. Truth is, they list the names of people as if, and their addresses, and their offense. And clergy do not carry the cultural privilege or moral authority that they once held. Now, I think this is for good reason. I can attest that the shift renders it hard to do any kind of ministry, to do anything that's right and good, to think creatively, to speak the truth. This misleading rhetoric and halting of the spread of partisan lies when you're afraid for your livelihood and your life. Lots of people are. But the moral arc of the universe is long, and it bends toward justice. No lie can live forever. The structural shift accompanying the rise of Christian political fundamentalism in the 80s and 90s reflected the divided understanding of authority. Conservative churches would happily tell you what to believe, who to vote for, and liberal ones would never tell you anything that might be so argumentative. They might be under fire if they were to tell you something. But you see, I'm noticing something, and maybe it took me this long. There's a new generation of religious leaders and a new generation of caring people have begun to take up the mantle of serving the 1 in 4 women who will have an abortion in their lifetimes, of teaching comprehensive sex education in light of a loving and caring community who desires that humans flourish, or advocates and organizes and teaches and writes for reproductive justice. You see, this all boils down to one thing. At least in my mind, it all boils down to this one thing, and that's standing up for all women. And that's what we're called to do. You testify before Congress, And I believe there's much at stake in this long-held practice. Much at stake. It only takes, all of 5 minutes to learn you can't please everyone. Except here, you know. The mainline churches in times of declining resources and members and influence has spent 40 years in the shadows of evangelical megachurches. I don't mind telling you, I really can't stand them. I turn them on and I say, are you serious? What they're saying. Where's the theology? Where's the forgetting the truth? An unholy confluence of fear, conflict avoidance, and attempts to copy corporate management culture. Many of us have failed to be bold in caring for these women. And you know who I'm talking about. We're talking about people who have no options. None. And they need professional, competent medical care, and we're guaranteed that by our Supreme Court. Now it is time. Now it is time to give hope to the downtrodden, to critique the powers and principalities, to tell the truth, to face arrest if it comes to it, to face danger. Their well-being is our well-being, and it stems in many, many, many facets. It's especially time to use whatever privilege we have on behalf of those with less. Can you imagine? People say, well, it's just on demand, so forget it. No, I don't know anybody who's ever had to consider getting an abortion who just feels, oh, well, I'll just do that, it's casual. They wrestle with it. They agonize over it. They struggle with it. At least I know that my mother would have. Now, did you hear the jingo phrase? I'm sure you've heard it. What would Jesus do? Maybe he would have joined the Unitarian Universalists. And one by one, hold those 3 SCOTUS judges accountable who lied in the Senate hearing, declaring that Roe v. Wade was not going to be revisited, much less overturned. They lied. 50 years ago, they ensured the rights of the marginalized, and a few months ago, they took it away. That's not something we can stand for. That's not something we should allow. But then, no lie can live forever. Kansas. You remember the Wizard of Oz? And Kansas, she said, is the name of her star. Kansas, she said. Kansas voted. I said, not so fast. Not so fast. They gutted many past SCOTUS decisions. And this was probably a defining moment in the restorative justice. Where do you stand? It is an issue of helping people who have every right to make decisions for their own body. And people say, thank you. See, that sign would have come in handy. I'm not in favor of abortion. Nah, but I'll be damned if anybody is going to take away a woman's choice to make that decision. That's hers to do, not ours. And I don't mean to get you all whipped up and all, whatever, but I do hope this. This I do hope. That you join me in the celebration. This is still, is that my cleaning lady again? Jeez. I can't believe this. Look, forget her. Join me in the celebration. 50 years ago, courageous people with reasonable thought and understanding what was in the best interest of people, gave rights to people, because we are the United States of America, where we protect the rights of the marginalized as well as those of the mainstream. Yes, that's who I'm celebrating. I'm celebrating today. I hope you join me. This is the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. Amen.